Welcome to the Phoenix Effect podcast with Elle, Kristen, and Dennis. We are three narrative-trained therapists, and we will be interviewing storytellers from all walks of life. We will explore what people do to find belonging, purpose, and success. Listen in as we delve into the depths of the human experience. If you have a story you would like to tell, stay tuned to find out how to become a part of the show. Are you ready for a good story? Here we go. Welcome, Anastazja.
Hello. Hi. Hi, everyone.
Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And thank you for inviting me to share a little of my story and what I'm doing in the world.
Yeah, can you tell our audience a little bit about where you are in the world and what you like to do while you're there?
Yeah, sure. So I'm originally Polish. I was born in Poland in 1994. And then I live in Spain for 5 years since I was 19 until I was 25. That's when I got into my first toxic relationship with a life coach who was 25 years older than me. And as I left that relationship and actually had to leave Spain because that person was stalking me at work and really was threatening me, and I couldn't get a restriction order. So I had a dream when I left that relationship and desire in my heart to find people who have been through what I've been through when it comes to abuse and trauma. And they found the secret of like how to be happy again. And behind that, there was my desire to do acting. I used to act in theater back when I was living in Spain and Poland, which was therapeutical for me. It's like about gestalt and doing art. So I gave myself a second chance and I flew to LA in 2019 in July, which will be 5 years, right? Yeah. And then I opened a Facebook group and I started slowly sharing my story. And through the word of mouth, I found over 88 people who shared their story of going through trauma, abuse, and then finding the way of healing their body, their mind, their psyche. And I discovered that sharing your story in a community is really therapeutical. You feel like you belong, first of all. You feel you release part of the shame. You feel there's nothing wrong with you. And the opposite of that is you feel some sense of compassion for others, and then you're able to give it to yourself. And you also discover you have superpowers. And there are people who sometimes approach you after you share your story of, hey, that really gave me hope. And that sometimes means a lot because you start to create a new self-image and seeing yourself from a perspective of being your own hero. And that means a lot when I used to struggle, and many people who I interview with had the interview. We used to struggle with low self-worth, like feeling not good enough and all those limiting stories. And so that experience really helped me. And I'm blessed to say that the people I interviewed almost 4 years ago, because the interviews has been going through the last 3.5 years. Some of those people I interview, they're right now authors and bestseller authors, speakers, and they did all that work by themselves. But I had the pleasure and the blessing to meet them back when they started sharing their story. And for some of them, I was the first person who they share publicly story, which I was feeling like, wow, they really trust me. Back then on my journey, it was a lot, like to have people trust me because I couldn't trust myself back then. I still was struggling with identity somewhere, because when you live such a toxic dynamic, you question everything, who you are, what you want. And at the end you discover, looking back, I see the puzzles coming together, and that's why I can do what I'm doing today, which is Exposé and my podcast, and just being on your podcast, and happy to be here.
This is so on message with what we love to do as well. Tell us more about Exposé.
So the main message of Exposé is that your story, by allowing yourself to share your story on a video like us right now, you are opening yourself for transforming that, transmuting that energy, that's the word, releasing it as a chapter to the world. And so that story doesn't anymore own you. And by doing that in a community, you also allow yourself to be celebrated, to be seen, to be heard. And what really exposes is just that experience of being heard and seen and received, and also creating the impact by sharing your story.
So if our listeners have gone through toxic relationships or some kind of abuse, they could go to Exposé and listen to story after story of different people from different walks of life, but you can find that common feeling felt.
Yes, yeah, just like you said, that was actually my idea in my mind, to put all those stories like a puzzle. So when you will see those, I actually edited 15 episodes from those 360 hours. So each of those 15 episodes focuses on different keywords. The first one is grooming, and the second is like red flags, types of abuse, aha moment, what helped you to leave the relationship, aha moment. Then what helped you to heal from the thriver's perspective, then experts' perspectives on healing mind, and then our body, and then shifting to thriving after you healed. So it goes on and goes on. But the whole idea of breaking it was that I realized it's more complex than just doing one documentary. And I wanted to give this documentary a chance to really expose all the parts of going from darkness to light and how it's all connected. And yes, so like you said, so if someone is listening to one of those 15 episodes, my intention was that they feel like, oh my God, this person is saying the words I could say about my story, and they feel heard, seen somehow, they feel belonging. And I'm also planning to do the next exposes. That's another call for action for others to join and experience themselves.
I love it. Yeah. I love your mission. And we'll link in the show notes if any listener wants to follow up and learn more. When you're ready, could you read us an excerpt of your own story?
Yes. Okay. My deepest dream in my childhood, after bringing my dad to life, was to run away from the chaos inside my home. I was 11 years old when my brother started suffering from bipolar disorder. We got into physical fight, and I was not able to defend myself. I locked myself in my little room, waiting for my mom to come back from work. I had a huge teddy bear, bigger than myself. I felt alone. I felt like no one cared if I was still breathing. The world would be better off without me. I would be happier if I was no more alive. You should die. When will you finally end that suffering? Nobody will miss you. I don't mean anything. I'm not important. You are nobody. Maybe people will appreciate you after your death. You are too much or not enough for this world, said the little voice of an abandoned child inside of me. As I was crying, thinking how I'm feeling alone in my little world and that I am not deserving to be loved and happy. The little abandoned child inside me said, I don't want to hear. I don't want to see. I don't want to feel. And that's how I disconnected myself from myself. When I was lying on my bedroom floor, thinking about dying, I felt a divine presence. And I said my prayer. God, if you exist, change my life because I cannot hear, I cannot be buried anymore. I cannot live like this. When I felt like the weakest person in the entire world, I connected with the source of everything. I felt I am part of something bigger than myself.
Thank you.
Thank you. All fell asleep.
No, not at all. Anastazja, how was it to read a portion of your story to us?
At first, I was a little surprised that I felt like that back then, because it's not longer in that huge part of my identity. There's some ups and downs in my journey still, and I'm healing. But so I was surprised. Oh, wow. I really wanted to die in one part of my life many times. I actually remembering those thoughts of doing something to myself since I was 11 and never really telling anyone, because I was afraid that if I open up, because of my dad history, my dad was diagnosed with bipolar and schizophrenia, different diagnoses over the years. I was feeling I have to suffer in silence because I didn't want too much attention on my mental health. So I would not be put on some medication and go to some, they call it mental hospital, which wasn't true, because in the same time, if I open up, I might back then receive therapy and then never have those eating disorders and relationship disorders. So to answer your question, I think, proud of myself that I did pretty good job on just, I think, not hiding anymore and opening up. And actually, that's what Exposé is, which I feel like some part of me created it for myself, so I could expose all of that, what I try to, not just me, I think it's generational ancestral trauma of hiding, me coming up from Poland and my grandparents being part of the war. And as much as I tried to get any stories of my family, I couldn't really get too much. And that silence or short answers weren't really enough to quiet my curiosity and still search. So what I could discover was my own fears and talk about that. And I believe there are some parts of that fear, it's part of their fears. That's all connected. So I feel like some of those fears I faced and others are still here. And I think that's what makes life alive and makes me feel alive and makes me want to wake up so I can face some of the fears I still have.
You're naming both the generational impact and the familial impact of these patterns of hiding and keeping things in, and noticing how that's impacting even your own story. And I'm hearing in this little excerpt that you shared a little girl who was just holding in a lot and terrified of what would happen if anybody found out what was going on.
Yeah, terrified. Yeah. And somewhere I just thought about the little girl of my grandmother and her grandmother, and it's just amazing to be able to also see the blessing in that, because somewhere they gave me a gift of being able to heal that. And now I have the tools for that. Back then there wasn't internet and therapy as accessible as it is now. So I somewhere feel blessed, and also that I want to give others hope with what I'm doing, that healing can be fun. And I almost feel like doing it together, like sharing stories and really being present, like you are right now, listening and nodding your head, and you both are really connected and validating me. That means a lot. Somewhere really gives compassion to that little part of you. And it's, yay, we are important.
So important that when you were reading, you said I couldn't bear it. And you started, it felt like you started to get a little choked up.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering if your body was re-experiencing how it felt to be so isolated. And I'm curious that bearing. Do you have a felt sense of what it was you were trying to bear in that moment?
All those emotions, it felt I didn't know what to do with all that crying every day and feeling allowed to express that. Really, I feel almost there was only so much I could express openly. And now most of the time, my mom had 3 jobs. She was a single mom after my dad took his life. So it was hard for her financially. So I feel like I just my own feelings. Yeah, I just didn't know. I didn't have the really safe space. I, I think that's what it was. And my brother aggression was really, it was that burning too. Like I didn't have place to run away, because your home should be the place you feel safe. And I remember I like to stay at school longer back then and do some extra activities and start maybe theater or some art at school. So I was afraid what's going to happen in a home, and just living that survival mode. I think that, yeah, that was what I couldn't bear, not being able to really play. And that's why I feel like now I'm really catching up and allowing myself to play and have a lot of fun time. And maybe not a lot and I should have more.
You use so many different resources, right? Like you had the theater, you need to stay at school, but there were moments where you had to go to your room just to keep your body physically safe.
Mhm.
Where was your mom? You're alone in the house with, is it a younger brother with bipolar?
Older.
You said an
4 years.
older brother. So she knows that her older son could be potentially violent with her young daughter.
Mhm.
And she just leaves you to it.
When she was at home, she would protect me, but I think she just didn't have we didn't have a family support to really somebody caring and coming and helping, if that makes sense. So there's a lot of, my mom doesn't have support from her mom. There's a lot of generational neglect.
Yeah.
And I know a lot about my mom's story, which is horrible. So I know why she couldn't be there many times for me. Yeah, somewhere I think I had to become adult. And even though I'm smiling now, I feel that helps me relax a little bit. Because even after those years, this conversation is tough, and there is no logic there. But I I think that she didn't do it intentionally. It just, and I wasn't really maybe asking so much for help, because I saw how she was struggling, just trying to provide. Yeah, and I was afraid some part of me I will lose her. I love her so much, and I was like, I remember as a child I used to pray, please don't take my mom away, because that fear of, oh my God, what will happen to me? No, I didn't want to go to foster child, like if something happened to my mom.
You were already experiencing so much tragedy. And I can imagine, how old do you imagine yourself to be around this time? I'm just curious. What age are you at in this
Uh,
story?
yeah, It was like 13 or 12, 11, something around that.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about being a kid and not quite sure how the world works, not quite sure about how mental health works, not quite sure about who should be responsible for what. And here you are, the burden of having to figure it all out is placed on you. And that feels really terrifying because how are you supposed to know if there's not anybody there explaining to you what it means to struggle with mental health or what it means to feel safe or how to ask for help, right? Those aren't responsibilities that a child is supposed to have placed on them. Those are responsibilities an adult is supposed to have placed on them. And I can just imagine that as a child, feeling like you are responsible for figuring all these things out and not knowing how, that would be really hard to bear.
I never thought about this way because I just don't want to. I didn't want to feel like I had a bad mom because I feel like she gave me so much. But yeah, it's true that it's like almost I feel a lot of resistance to receive what you said. Still, it feels like there's some wall.
Yeah.
Like, oh, your mom is good. Don't let them tell you she's not. She didn't do the good job. But part of me knows that's true. That yeah, we all deserve that safety and not somewhere shaped me in a way that I could tolerate abuse when I was in those relationships and really accept things which are unacceptable and forgive and be like in that male energy, my little like becoming my own father somewhere, looking for that father too outside. But
Yeah, it was really normal for you to feel unsafe.
and even now, as I am in a healthy relationship and really loving my partner, when many times when he's always the same, like stable every day. And for me, for a while at the beginning, it was boring. Like my brain was actually addicted to the highs and lows, and I had to spend a lot of time with myself to regulate those feelings, what was coming up behind of having that dynamic of like love and ups and downs and some danger and unsafety, and safety feels almost unsafe when you're used to unsafety.
Of course. And it sounds like you've done so much work to try to figure all this out. And if you don't, and that feels true when you were young, trying to sort through, trying to figure this out. And if you don't mind my noticing, you still are. It's in your work. Can we figure this out?
Can I figure this out? What did you say the last?
Yeah. Can I figure this out? Can I make all of this make sense? Can I go through 15 different things that lead into abuse? Can we go through all the different ways to treat trauma? Can I show up in my relationship a different way? There's so much you're still trying to make sense of.
Make sense of? What do you mean? Like as a child, I was trying to make sense of what was going on in my environment, and that's what I'm doing now, trying to make sense of.
I don't know. How does that land for you? Does that feel true?
It's make sense of. Huh. You always surprise me with something. Yeah, it might be that the reason somewhere, one of the reasons why I'm doing all that work is not only I thought it's healing, but somewhere it's trying to make sense, like bring some logic in it. So the suffering wasn't like just for nothing.
That is healing, to make sense of something that hasn't made sense.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing. It's a beautiful gift, but it does sound like it's a storied gift. This has been something you've done right out of the gate. There's big emotions, there's complicated mental health issues, there's trauma, and you've been trying to figure it all out for a very long time.
How is all of this hitting you? How are you? What are you noticing about?
I was just, I guess, sending compassion to myself and to that how much resources. I'm very resourceful, like, and also I was thinking about all those people who helped me on my way, on my therapies. Yeah. So that's what I had in my mind.
I heard earlier you talking about the lack of resources that your family has had, that your mother had, working 3 jobs, trying to make things work after your father passed, lack of resources as you go further into your family history, right? And here you are, a resourceful person who is trying to make sense of something that sounds like maybe you're the first in your family line to make that choice. How do we make sense of all of this?
I'm going to take a deep breath.
Good for you. It's a good resource to breathe.
Mhm.
Feels like there's still a heavy burden that you bear at times. It's good to just breathe.
Now I'm curious what kind of heavy burden I'm carrying. What is she talking about?
I guess I'm referring to the work you do. It's not that it's burdensome, but there's like this drive to make all of your trauma make sense for everybody and to be the person in your family that does say the trauma stops here. The untreated mental health stops here. To be the change maker.
I don't know what to say.
What are you feeling? It just feels like there's a lot of emotion that's been coming up for you. I'm curious what's behind all of that.
I felt headache a little for a while, like too much figuring out almost.
A familiar feeling. Yeah, you know this one. You know this feeling. Trying to figure all that out.
You mean that I can do something totally else if I realize that with my time, I can do totally something else if I realize that I don't have to make sense of all of that. Like if I know the meaning of it, that's enough. And I don't have to keep looking for that meaning for others somewhere.
I think you get to do what you want to do. I'm not saying that you should or shouldn't be doing anything, because I think the work that you're doing is beautiful. And for those of us who have experienced a lot of trauma younger in life, and we have to learn to be the parents that we wanted but never had access to, that can be both, that can feel like both a gift, and that can be so exhausting because there's still the young part inside that's saying, oh man, I just want to be cared for instead of having to be the one caring for everyone else. So I think it's more just about noticing what's happening. It doesn't mean that anything you're doing is right or wrong or good or bad. It just is what it is. And seeing the dynamic behind it of just saying, oh, okay, that's what's going on. Okay. There's a lot to this story. Would you add something else to that?
Yeah, I just want to bless how good the work is that you do, how needed and important. And it's people like you that we do need to have do that work. It's essential. And what drives some of this is what you had to learn to do to survive as a girl. It's a beautiful thing and a good thing, but let's also remember she's still in there. She has a lot that she's trying to make sense of, even in this moment. And we're just welcoming her here. And if it ever does feel burdensome, that makes sense.
Thank you.
You're so deeply welcome.
Thank you for the work you both are doing. Because that attention is, wow, it's still like hard to accept sometimes.
You have shown up so beautifully and authentically and vulnerably today. It's such a gift to everyone and at great cost to yourself. And that's where we end today. We are so glad you joined us. We want to invite you to get involved in the show. First, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. That way, you don't miss out on a future episode. If you're super curious, you can also find us on YouTube. Second, if you'd like to learn more about joining us and sharing your story, send us an email at phoenixeffectpodcast@gmail.com. That's phoenixeffectpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. This podcast and website represents the opinions of Elizabeth Key, Kristen Boskel-John, and Dennis Roberts, and their guests to the show and website. The content here should not be taken as medical or psychological advice. This content is for informational purposes only, and because each person is so unique, please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions. The views and opinions expressed in the podcast and website are our own and do not represent that of our places of work. While we make every effort to ensure that the information we are sharing is accurate, we welcome any comments, suggestions, or correction of errors. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast or website. In no way does listening, reading, emailing, or interacting on social media with our content establish a therapist-client relationship.